The British Royal Commission is when Britain was in charge and wanted to allocate land for two different sides after they left the area. They wanted to leave a small part left over for them, which was Jerusalem. On November 29, 1947, the United Nations approved a plan to separate the British Mandate territory of Palestine into two states, one Jewish and one Arab. The boundaries were based solely on demographics. The plan was made more complicated due to the fact that the Arabs were drawn to the wealthy Jewish towns and moved in due to the high living standards there. This led to many Arabs being taken from their home and becoming refugees. And fighting ensued almost immediately after the resolution passed. 6 months later, a wider war broke out between Israel and 5 Arab armies. The fighting continued on out of anger in each other due to the hostile circumstances. Later on, Israel formed peace treaties with 2 of those countries that fought against them in the Arab army, Egypt and Jordan.
There were 2 main plans for dividing this controversial territory. The first plan was created by the British Royal Commission between 1937 and 1938, shown here on the map on the left. This plan created a larger Arab state, shown in green, and a small Israeli state, shown in blue. This plan also included a small territory that would continue to be controlled by the British, shown in pink. This territory included Jerusalem, and made it extremely controversial as both the Arabs and the Jews believed they had a claim to the holy city. The plan shown in the middle is the UN Partition Plan. This created a large Israeli state, in blue, and a smaller Arab state than the British plan, in green, and left Jerusalem as an international zone. Making Jerusalem an international zone would leave 100,000 Jews isolated from their country and cut off by the Arabs. These borders were drawn based on demographics, and as such, the Israeli borders had little to no security. Although the Jews were to be given more land, most of this land here was desert. The map on the right shows the borders that resulted from the War of 1948. Let's take a look at this in more detail. These 3 maps show how land was conquered and then lost by the Arabs during the war. The green here in the middle map shows the land that they conquered, while the orange on the rightmost map shows the land that Israeli forces were able to gain back. Today's borders are slightly different from those than after the War of 1948 and resulted from another war, the War of 1967 or the 6 Days War. After the war, Israel had control over all of this territory shown in dark green, including the Sinai Peninsula, which it eventually gave back to Egypt. The map on the right shows the borders as they are today. Although continued settlement building and the construction of the security wall by Israel may cause these borders to change.
Israel's point of view on the partition plan and the War of 1948 is very self-explanatory. Obviously, almost all Jews were ecstatic that they finally had a place they could call home. Jews, on the day that the partition plan was announced, gathered in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem to celebrate. However, some Jews viewed the partition plan as a compromise and were unwilling to accept it. Additionally, some, such as Israeli politician Menachem Begin, warned that the partition would not bring peace because the Arabs would also attack the small state and that the war ahead would compromise their existence and future. Israelis call the War of 1948 the War of Independence as it allowed them to establish their own country.
A majority of the Palestinians opposed the partition due to the fact that they did not like the Jews invading on their territory. They refused to accept this, and their anger was evident when Jewish agency representatives attempted a last-ditch effort to reach a compromise in 1947. The Arab League leader said that the Arab world was not in a compromising mood. The adoption of Resolution 181 was followed by outbreaks of violence in Palestine, and almost a year later, after a year of violence, in July 1948, the Security Council decided in a resolution that the situation in Palestine constituted a threat to peace and ordered an immediate ceasefire, declaring that failure to comply would be considered a breach of peace, requiring immediate consideration of enforcement measures under the chapters of the United Nations Charter. It is important to note that the Jews of Palestine were not satisfied with the land allotted to them, but nevertheless they welcomed the compromise.
President Truman agreed in the Zionist movement, or the establishment of Israel, because he wanted to fulfill the Balfour Declaration and felt it was the humanitarian thing to do to help the plight of Jews after the Holocaust. He did not believe that it was going to compromise the rights of the Arabs. American policy supported the president's view. According to political opinion polls, 65% of Americans supported the creation of a Jewish state. During the third quarter of 1947 alone, over 60,000 postcards were sent to the White House, most urging the president to use his American influence in the UN. The U.S. was in a complex part of history during this time, so the fact that 65% of the nation agreed with the president is important to note. On the other hand, many members of the Truman administration opposed partition, including Defense Secretary James Forrestal, who believed in Zionist aims posed a threat to American oil supplies and its strategic position in the region. The Joint Chiefs of Staff worried that Arabs might align themselves with the Soviets if they were alienated by the West. These internal opponents did a great deal in undermining U.S. support for the establishment of a Jewish state.
Even today, land proportions are still a source of conflict between Israel and Palestine. In 1967, Israel conquered more land, and both nations continue to try and establish more settlements. Israel is trying to take more land from Palestine, and the nations have been fighting over the land of Gaza for many decades. Today, Palestine has around 2,402 square miles of land, while Israel has a whopping 8,109 square miles of land. Just recently, a small outbreak broke out in Palestine after Israeli forces detained 8 Palestinians, including a minor. These outbreaks are almost daily, and the tension between the two nations continues to be a major issue.